Welcome, everyone. Welcome to SOS Archivi panel as a preparation for ICA conference of 2022 in Rome. My name is Hrvoje Stančić, and I will be moderating today's event. This panel is titled How is Blockchain Technology Transforming Archives and Records? And I believe we have great colleagues and great speakers today. I will start by introducing all of us in order we will be presenting. So I will be introducing firstly myself, then Anne Gilliland, Jesse Mckee, and Victoria Lemieux. So for myself, I'm a Vice Dean for Organization and Development, Chair of Archival and Documentation Sciences, and full professor at the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, University of Zagreb. I'm editor of the book Trust and Records in an Open Digital Environment, co-author of Archival Dictionary, and author of the book Digitization. I'm a member of the research committee at the Inter Pares Trust AI International Research Project and was director of the European research team at the previous Inter Pares Trust project, where I led a blockchain-related research study, resulting with a trust chain model addressing issues of expiring digital signatures and digital records. For that, I was awarded a bronze medal at the International Innovation Exhibition in 2021. At the Creation Standards Institute, I'm president of the Mirror Technical Committee for development of ISO TC 307 Blockchain and Distributed Ledger Technologies Standard. Anne Gilliland is a director of the Center for Information as Evidence and former associate dean for information studies within the School of Education and Information Studies, University of California, Los Angeles. She is also a faculty affiliate of UCLA's Centers for Digital Humanities, European and Russian Studies, and for the study of international migration, as well as the Promise Institute for Human Rights at the UCLA Law School. Professor Gilliland is a fellow of the Society of American Archivists and recipient of numerous awards in archival and information studies. Her interests relate broadly to the history, nature, human impact, and technologies associated with archives, record keeping, and memory, particularly in translocal and international contexts. Specifically, her work addresses record keeping and archival systems and practices in support of human rights and daily life in post-conflict settings, particularly in the countries emerging out of the former Yugoslavia, and rights in records for forcibly displaced persons, the role of community memory in promoting reconciliation in the wake of ethnic conflict, bureaucratic violence, and the politics of metadata, digital record keeping and computational archival science, and research methods and design in archival studies. Jesse Mckee. He is a leader in a cultural industries, a curator of contemporary art and design, and he is head of strategy at 221A. 221A works with artists and designers to research and develop social, cultural, and ecological infrastructure. There, he leads an organization's advancement, communications, research, and programming. From 2019 to 24, he is the lead investigator on 221A's blockchain and cultural padlocks digital strategy, which is developing a digital cooperative culture by recommoning land, data, and objects. From 2020 to 2022, he is a member of the Downtown Vancouver Business Improvement Association's Policy Advisory Council, and he is challenged by rebooting cities and public culture venues in equitable, novel, and progressive ways in the wake of the COVID-19 long-tail global pandemic. Previously, he was the curator of the Banff Center and has worked with leading cultural organizations such in Vancouver, Paris, New York, London, Hong Kong, and Romania. He has written essays and reviews. A recent essay, Surreal Ghosts and Neuroplastic Ancestors, correlates Julia Fierer and Tamara Henderson's filmmaking with the neuroplastic effects of Vancouver's economic enclosure over the past decade, which was published by the Maurice and Helen Belkin Art Gallery, University of British Columbia, and the Institute for Contemporary Art, University of Pennsylvania. And finally, Victoria Lemieux. She is an experienced and multidimensional technology leader, innovator, and academic. She currently holds a position as an associate professor of archival science at the University of British Columbia's School of Information. She is also founder and co-lead of blockchain at UBC, the University of British Columbia's multidisciplinary blockchain research cluster, ranked #1 in Canada by CoinDesk. She has previously held senior positions as a professional archivist and records manager within the public sector, as a vice president responsible for information governance and IT security for Global Investment Bank, in higher education as a senior administrator and educator, at the World Bank as a senior public sector specialist, and as a chief information security and privacy officer for Health Intelligence Company. She has consulted for the United Nations, the Commonwealth Secretariat, and the Inter-American Development Bank, and has collaborated on research projects with the U.S. Treasury Office of Financial Research. Her academic research focuses on risk to the availability of trustworthy records and how these risks impact on transparency, financial stability, public accountability, and human rights. Victoria currently sits on the International Standard Organization's Technical Committee 307, Blockchain's Distributed Ledgers. She holds a doctorate from University College of London, and since 2005 has been certified information system security professional. She is the winner of 2015 Emmett Alethea Award for outstanding contributions to the field of records management, the 2015 World Bank Big Data Innovation Award, and 2020 Blockchain Ecosystems Leadership Award. And I'll stop here with the introductions of my colleagues and co-speakers, and we'll start by sharing my slides with you. And I will be briefly introducing here a blockchain-based diploma authentication system. But before I do that, I will just say a few words on how blockchain works. I'm well aware that most of you know how a blockchain works, but this is just one slide. And I would like to say that blockchain relies on the immutable structure, and it starts with I would start here by explaining that it's founded on hash values. This is a one-wave function which introduces a string like shown at the bottom of this slide. And this is a fixed length string, and it is the same no matter whether you apply this function to any kind of document or any kind of video. So you'll be ending up with a fixed length string. You can combine those hashes together in a form of a Merkle tree shown here. And also, after combining them, you can combine the so-called top hash with the hash of the previous block in a blockchain and ask all the participants of this calculation to confirm that this is correct, that this is truth. If majority, which means 50% of nodes plus one, confirm this. This is then formalized as a next block, and it relies on a distributed ledger consensus, because every confirmed transaction is recorded by each and every node in this distributed ledger. The next stop hash and the next block relies again on a previous block confirmed hash, and so on. So this is the append-only structure. Nothing could be deleted from it, and usually you don't upload documents or records to the blockchain. You just upload or register hashes of them with a little bit of metadata. So this is why you would not, you most often will not have issues with GDPR. So if we now, let's say, state that all of you at least understand how blockchain functions, of course, this was a highly simplified version of explanation. I will just say a few words on the diploma authentication system that was developed at the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences. It started in March 2021. We prepared the project idea, and the system was developed by a local Croatian company focusing on artificial intelligence and robotic process automation. The motivation for starting the project was the fact that the faculty where I come from annually issues around 1,300 diplomas, and that we have detected some forged diplomas circling around the market. This was, of course, made public, and that triggered at some point a huge amount of requests for authentication of diplomas. So we have calculated that our employees spend at least half a year of full-time equivalent for one employee just checking whether some diplomas from the market following the requests by employees are authentic or not. So the aim of this project was to enable digital authentication of diplomas issued in paper form. So we are not issuing digital diplomas yet. We are just trying to authenticate physically issued diplomas. The aim was also to decrease administrative burden, to exclude as much as possible repetitive tasks of constantly checking and rechecking diplomas, and to open possibility for future issuing of digital diplomas or their e-versions. So this is how it looks. This is the front side and back side of diploma that we are issuing. We have added a QR code at the back side of diploma with a little bit of explanation what it means and what can you do with it. So an employee can scan this diploma and get the verification of the diploma he or she is holding in his hand or her hand that it is authentic. This is how it looks from the system. The system either confirms the diploma is authentic or that the diploma with the given data is not registered in the system, because we also have some older diplomas or new diplomas may still not be in the system. We also provide proof from the blockchain distributed system. This is an example of the proof of the block calculation. And you can also independently, and this is the strength of the system, you can independently check whether the hash of that particular diploma and the whole block was anchored in a public blockchain. So you can check that independently from our system. Of course, older diploma were not issued with QR codes at the back, and we will be gradually adding them to the system. And this is how the system looks like, where you can add or input identification of the diploma, requested information, and get the proof from the system. The system is available in English and Croatian language, because we are simultaneously issuing to both linguistic versions of the diplomas. Why is the system secure? Because it protects against the man-in-the-middle attack by independent blockchain authentication, and we are adding a little bit of salt, let's say, to a block of a blockchain, which is made out of the unique ID of our system registering the diplomas. So anyone who wants to forge our diploma will not be able to register the diploma also with the ID of our system. Is the system reliable in the long run? We think it is, because we are not creating hashes out of the diploma PDFs, because sometime in future we might be in need to forward, migrate, or convert PDFs to some other file formats or a new format of PDF, but we are creating hashes out of the unique set of data from the diploma XML, as shown in this slide. To conclude, authentication of diplomas issued in paper by blockchain-based system was shown here. This means that we can authenticate diploma printed on any kind of paper. So the type of paper or physical signature may not be as important as they were before. The aim was achieved, and this was to eliminate repetitive tasks of checking or authenticating previously issued diplomas. We have also made grounds for future development of e-diplomas, and we use blockchain. We have used blockchain in a particular place where we saw that it added value. So we did not use blockchains just for the sake of blockchain. This is the added value. And I think that this opens ground for new types of records in the archives, and we'll have to discuss, or we have to see later on, is that a challenge to the archives? Because new types of records might be coming to the archives. And with this, I would like to thank you, and I would also like to ask you to hold your questions until the end, and you will have time to ask questions or make questions, and we will be answering or trying to provide answer to them later on. And this is all from me, and now I would like to invite the next speaker, and this is Anne Gilliland, to join us. And welcome, Anne. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Stancic. I'm not quite sure how to share. There's my file, sorry. So as the introduction suggested, I am somebody whose research is very much involved in dealing with populations that have been forcibly displaced, sometimes also mass migrations, and refugee populations more generally. And the questions that arise that relate to records, record keeping, and archives, and often very large populations that have been disenfranchised archivally. And what we see in all of these circumstances that we work with is so often records are central. Records are used as ways to displace populations. Records are kept on these populations. And these populations that end up distributed around the world often are not in a position to keep their own records or to access them. So when we were asked to become involved in the development of the archive project for the Rohingya community, it was a very exciting opportunity to address problems that we have seen come up over and over again, particularly problems of how refugees and populations that have been forcibly displaced can move records across national spaces and legal jurisdictions, how they can build evidence of human rights violations and sometimes war crimes and other abuses, and how they can continue to keep their communities knitted together and culturally intact over time. And this project, which has just concluded its prototype development stage, is a really excellent example of that. So I think most people probably know a little bit about the displacement and persecution of the Rohingya community inside Myanmar, a population that was largely concentrated in Rakhine State in Myanmar, that we can trace documentarily back to at least the 9th century, but where there has been really a long history of persecution and denial of this population having a long-term presence in what was formerly Burma, now referred to as Myanmar. This is a persecution that has, of course, had terrible violence associated with it, documented genocide, but also has been carried out through records and classification to deny the national presence and citizenship status of Rohingya population. And this was particularly the case in the 2014 national census, when Rohingya people were required to register as Bengalis rather than as Rohingya. And as a result of successive waves of displacement over several generations, you have a diaspora of approximately 3.5 million people around the world, people who are still trying to find out what has happened to family members, trying to hold their own personal histories together, trying to pursue citizenship because they are stateless people, and rights to reclaim property also inside Myanmar. And a lot of community-wide activism does revolve around records and record keeping. So this graphic here is just, it's from United Nations High Commission for Refugees, that shows you something about where the populations are displaced around the Asia-Pacific region. There are also substantial Rohingya communities in Saudi Arabia, Australia, the UK, and the United States. The data, the records that have survived, that we are trying to track down, gather and digitize, are in all of these spaces. Many of them are in refugee camps, for example, in Bangladesh, where conditions are absolutely deplorable, and where it is very dangerous for the populations in the camps and the field officers who are trying to collect these documents. And where there isn't electricity, and where having devices that could be used for communication or scanning also put the carriers at great risk. The other issue that we're dealing with is a lot of state-sponsored digital disruption of any kind of digital presence for the Rohingya communities, carried out through hacking, carried out through social media disinformation campaigns. So we have security issues we're trying to deal with. We have trust issues and safety issues as well. But the goal here is to be able to use records and a preponderance of documentary evidence to push back against what has happened to this population. And blockchain and blockchain-like technologies seem to hold out the possibility for distributed, autonomous, permanent record keeping using decentralized storage technology that could be accessible from anywhere in the world, and would provide powerful evidentiary support for persecuted and displaced communities. They're difficult to hack or to destroy because of their distribution and the way that the technology works, as Hervoy has already demonstrated. They're difficult to discredit evidentiarily because of their security mechanisms and the fact that it's very easy to perceive unauthorized change. They allow for cumulative record keeping and the ability to knit together fragmented or fragmentary content, which is often the case with refugee populations. It doesn't require a physical archive and obviously can be accessed from anywhere. So this project has been developed out of the Rohingya project, which is a grassroots community project that is led by Saqib Sheikh and Mohammed Noor. And the our archive component of it very much builds out of the perceived need to provide support and capacity building for Rohingya-led initiatives of this type. The goals of the project are threefold, and all three that often don't sit very well together, actually. One is very much evidentiary and legal, as I already mentioned, and involves identifying, preserving, and producing bureaucratic records and other forms of documentary evidence. And this is in parallel with another archive, the Rohingya Genocide Archive, also being developed. The second is really a community archive purpose to preserve and promote cultural memory and practices of Rohingya diaspora communities around the world. And the third is to promote scholarly research relating to Rohingya community and experiences. The partners, in addition to the Rohingya project, are Datarella, and our partner there is Phil Coulter, and they are based in Munich. They work with Arweave, which I'll mention in a minute. The network that I'm myself part of, the Rights in Records in Displacement and Diaspora network. My colleague James Lowry at the Archival Technologies Lab at the City University of New York is the other person. We're working together. And we have some funding. The Rohingya project received an award from the Roddenberry Foundation for innovative development of disruptive technology, and also a grant from Arweave to develop an MVP, a prototype of this application. And I think I might run just a few minutes over here, if that's okay. I wanted to just say a little bit. I could go over the technology, but I think we can keep that for later if people want to hear some of the specifics of the technology. But I thought I'd focus more on the sort of record side. The requirements for this archive, which are ones that we would see for other refugee projects being very relevant. It must be secure. We have to be able to provide trust assurances at all points in the chain of collecting, generating, storing, and using digital or digitized documents if we're going to use them for any kind of evidentiary purposes or bureaucratic transactions. So the trust assurances of blockchain technology are very important. But there's a social aspect to trust as well. The archive and its procedures have to be trusted by the Rohingya individuals and the Rohingya community more generally. It also has to provide for their personal safety too. It has to be able to support access by multiple users and users, which is something we're still trying to figure out, how we compartmentalize access. And I'm actually working on another project, the Crossing Pride project, which is an LGBTQ refugee storytelling archive project that has the same issue that it is running into. We have to address, and Hervoy brought some of this up actually a minute ago, multiple language and multiple script needs and very different kinds of documentation. And then, of course, we're working with digitized copies of, again, of paper documents. And we can only work with the best copies that we can make under the conditions we're working in. And we're not going to have ways to follow up with contributors easily in most cases. We started this project working with a software developer for real estate transactions, international jurisdictional transactions, but the economics of working with blockchains simply didn't work out for, working with populations who simply don't have the kind of economic basis to participate. And we're also concerned about the environmental impact of blockchain mining, the kind of computational power that is required. And so we've turned instead to Arweave, which is a decentralized storage protocol, and the base that is being used for permaweb, which is a new approach developed in the last couple of years that is hoped will provide permanent storage on the blockchain for applications such as this one in a way that is cost effective, basically counting on diminishing storage costs into the future as a way to subsidize continuing storage, permanent storage. And it is a network that is accessible via HTTP and allows great interoperability with existing web infrastructure. I'm going to just skip ahead. I have some quotes here actually from Arweave and from my colleague Phil that we could come back to. But let me just wrap up by saying that the kinds of issues that have come up in developing the prototype are actually really very fundamentally archival issues and record keeping issues, perhaps even more so than technology issues. They revolve around the words I put in red here: trust, data protection, multiple access needs, and guarantee of sustainability into the future. Really, really important for us. We have to be able to increase trust, social trust, and we have to be able to increase the legal trust in these materials. We will encounter data protection requirements that are different in different jurisdictions around the world. And as I mentioned earlier, we have to figure out how to compartmentalize access to support these different kinds of access needs that a multi-purpose archive invokes. So I'm just going to stop there and thank you and turn it back to Hervoy, I think.
Thank you, Anne. This was really interesting, and it was really just a glimpse of very important projects that you undertake, and it just opens up a tons of questions, and I hope we'll have time later on to discuss them. Thank you. So now I'm inviting Jesse Mckee to join us, and Jesse, the floor is yours.
Good morning, and thanks so much to the ICA and SOS Archivi and Victoria Lemieux at UBC for inviting me to join you today. So from my introduction, I'm a curator of contemporary art and design, and while I've managed collections as part of my roles, I've always kind of been more involved in the commissioning and the creation of new projects and new works by artists, and to work in a kind of a new institutional capacity so that, artist, audience, creators, receivers of that culture are kind of part of the same system rather than kind of stratifying it in kind of traditional cultural venues. And on that note, I think what I wanted to offer today was something a bit more of a challenge, I think, to archivists who may be listening, rather than maybe a demonstration of a project that will really kind of give you a sense of how to do something. I think the archivists can reach out and we can figure out how to do this together. But we can just go back a little bit and maybe have a little bit of an art history lesson. And so this goes way back to, well, not way back, but it goes back to when I was an undergraduate student. But there was a term that was coming out in the late 90s and the early 2000s called Relational Aesthetics. And this came from a curator in France called Nicolas Bourriot. And he published a book on the title in 1998 that was quite influential. But essentially, he's saying that the relational aesthetics were a set of artistic practices which take as their theoretical and practical point of departure the whole of human relations and their social context, rather than an independent and private space. So Boyo saw artists as facilitators rather than makers, and he regarded art as information exchanged between the artists and the viewers. The artist, in this sense, gives access to power and the means to change, influence, adapt, or alter context. And so, I've been studying kind of blockchain technology, getting my toes wet around probably 2017 and formally since 2019. But seeing it evolve, for me, it feels like a continuation of what this term is. So there were a set of artists in the early 1990s who were working with this term, obviously. And I've just put a little example on this slide here, which is Pierre Huyghe and Philippe Parreno, two French artists as well. And this project, Anne Lee, that ran from 1999 to 2002, so a period of 3 years, the artists had purchased a manga character from a production studio in Japan. And these manga characters were being created and sold to kind of pop music producers, to advertising, to graphic novel publishers and the like. And the character could just be used by anyone for whatever means, as long as you own the copyright for it. So Pierre Huyghe and Philippe Parreno, they both bought this Anne Lee character and they quote unquote freed her from capitalism. And they offered the sign of Anne Lee up to other artists, and was kind of a place of collaboration. So over 3 years, different artists made different kind of interpretations of it. And then at the end of the 3 years, they had fireworks at Miami Beach during Art Basel. And they said farewell to Anne Lee, so no more collaborations could ever be made. So this is kind of like an early kind of indication of this. If you've ever been offered pad thai while walking around the galleries of MoMA, that might also be another example of relational aesthetics kind of coming from Venetia. So fast forwarding on into our current age, I'm going to speak about a project that I've been doing outside of my role at 221A, so it's kind of independent from that. But I've been working and establishing a decentralized organization called EBB, and we produce culture and technology for Web3 with a strategy that connects the physical world to the digital realm by building new tools, protocols, and communities. So when I'm talking about a do, I'm not necessarily the leader of it, although I may be part of the founding group, but it is kind of a distributed group of people around the world at this point, kind of working and collaborating together. We're really trying to get audiences and creators working between digital space and physical space, and kind of having what happens in digital space drive what happens in physical space, and what happens in physical space influence then what happens in digital space, just like the world we live in, but maybe in more of a kind of a designed or kind of an engaging way. And then my other co-founder I will mention is Nail Beloufa, who's an Algerian and French artist who lives in Paris. We've worked together for over a decade. And Eb really started through a film we made in 2014 that I helped produce, but he was director of, that was called Home is Whenever I'm With You, but it essentially foretold the pandemic we were going to be living in a couple of years later. It was, all told through Skype calls, and kind of demonstrated the world as a global pandemic took hold, and then a lot of social media disinformation and acceleration and confusion ensued. So just having some trouble with the slides here. So Ebb, as a decentralized organization, we only exist through collaborations with other people and other organizations. So we've been collaborating with other digital organizations from the Benefits, Centre Pompidou, Rhizome, NFT Paris, Cacao Foundation, and many more to come. And so we had this film in 2014, and then during the actual pandemic, we were invited to kind of display it for a year-long exhibition in Milan at the Pirelli hangar Bicocca. And then because it was the pandemic, Neil kind of came up with these avatars as these hosts, these kind of red figures. Mckee, maybe you could play the video now that will demonstrate the kind of characterization of the hosts.
If you want to build back better, come to the blue circle.
If you want to find true values, enter the yellow circle.
If you're tired of hearing their bullshit, enter the red circle.
You who enter here, abandon all hope.
And no, I don't abandon hope.
Come when you will it. You fool.
It's too late.
Great. Thank you, Mckee. So as you can see, they're kind of instigators. They may bother you. They may bother other people. They might provide some insight. So we started to develop these kind of calling them robots or hosts. But essentially, what we're looking at is the artist has become something else than just the image maker or the storyteller. And that's incredibly important for archival practices and how collections are formed, because I think we're kind of, as NFTs have created this kind of, I guess, moral panic around authenticity and these sorts of things when it comes to the creative work. Actually, we're getting closer to a point where we're going to be having machine-generated imagery. And a couple of weeks ago, we already saw the US take early steps in the copyright realm and say that images generated by machines cannot be copyrighted. The protocol that creates those images can be copyrighted, as that's developed by a person, but the images themselves cannot be copyrighted. And so we know that generative artwork is already, or machine-generated artwork is already a huge part of kind of the NFTs scene. So during this exhibition, we did a couple of experiments where we were doing kind of play to earn points, where you could win physical or kind of digital artworks kind of inside the exhibition. There's one of the other hosts, the yellow hosts. But then kind of as the NFT thing kind of entered in 2021, the exhibition ran all of 2021 and even into 2022 in Milan. And so we started to play with NFTs within this space too, kind of assigning that earn or play to win kind of configuration inside the exhibition or the network that we've created for the visitors. And then they could then take home NFTs or earn NFTs if you were kind of playing online with us. And this is all kind of interfaced through social platforms like Discord, which is kind of like a multi-layered kind of chat room for specific communities in that way. And it does have a few kind of blockchain and kind of crypto plugins that help it operate kind of with wallets and that way. Okay, and then our games are quite basic. They're not like very hard challenging, but they're really just to kind of get people engaged in these sorts of things. So we do have a couple of live projects, and I will say that there's one at the Centre Pompidou at the moment. So if you go see an exhibition called Réseau Monde, or Worlds of Networks, there's one of our robots, which is kind of a portal into our community, and it kind of connects you with. And as well, there's some examples of how it can kind of connect in. But also our community can also use these robots to display their own work at the same time. So I think that's a very interesting thing. We had one person do an NFT drop and announce that on the screens in the exhibition. This week, we're hosting a magazine called Temple Magazine, which does a magazine of video art and has a couple of works playing on it inside of there. And it's, these physical locations become a way to engage. So the artwork is now the system and the community we've created, and it's not so much, the posters or the NFTs that we need to archive. So, there needs to be a whole kind of rethinking of, art historians and artists and creators and archivists about what is it that we're actually trying to capture in the archive as a record of these experiences. As well, we also have another much larger live exhibition in Brussels at the moment. It was going to be closing this weekend. But it was so popular, people were spending up to 5 hours at a time inside these exhibitions, playing games and kind of taking in the content, that it's been extended until May 15th. So you can go see that show at a gallery called Clearing. And the title of the exhibition is called Pandemic Pandemonium. And it's kind of an evolution of the exhibition in Milan that we've created as well. So I can leave it there, and then hopefully that's enough for a rich discussion together. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jesse. This is very interesting, and I believe a lot of questions will be asked later on the connection between new form of art and archives and new types of records as well. But before that, we will be hearing from Victoria Lemieux, and I'm inviting her to share her slides with us. So, Victoria, I think you are still muted, so please unmute your mic.
Yes, can you see me now? And are you able to see my slides?
Not yet,
Not
but
yet.
it will come up, I guess.
Are you able to see them now?
Yes, they are here.
Okay, great. Yes, I had to
Go ahead.
change locations and mute myself because there's construction going on outside, and it was getting very loud. So wonderful to be here, and so fascinating to hear about all of these different projects that involve blockchain technology in different forms. And it really, I think maybe you're feeling excited about these developments, but also feeling that this is a very foreign landscape. So what a lot of my research has been about is really saying, well, actually this foreign landscape of record keeping isn't that foreign at all. We can recognize patterns. We can recognize the need to consider all of the issues of archival practice, as Anne mentioned, that we have been dealing with as archivists for centuries, really, and bodies of theory that we have developed over centuries can be applied to thinking about this technology. And so that's really, in my latest book, Searching for Trust, Blockchain Technology in an Age of Disinformation, what I really set out to do. And the purpose really was to make connections between what archivists understand and know about record keeping and this novel technology. And the reason I saw a need to do that is because I was observing all of these different blockchain projects that were all about creating trusted records, the foundation for the truth. And I understood that a lot of these claims really needed to be interrogated from the archival knowledge that we as archivists have. So in starting that journey in about 2016 and studying lots of different record keeping systems that involved blockchain technology, I actually began to observe what I feel is one of the most important things about this technology. So we've been living for decades now in this age of big data and artificial intelligence and in growing manipulatability and malleability of records. So the datafication of records is often what it's referred to. And this has brought us wonderful capabilities. And in fact, some of us are also involved in exploring those capabilities. In previous panel session led by Professor Luciana Duranti was looking at artificial intelligence and its application and use in archives. And so this wonderful malleability and manipulatability gives us new capabilities, but it also took away something from us. And that was this idea of intellectual and material fixity of records. And that material fixity and intellectual fixity of records has really been the foundation of society's epistemic trust. So when we can place trust in our records to be what they purport to be, authentic, because we know they have integrity, because we can identify them and who created them, we have a foundation for epistemic trust. We have a foundation to establish whether truth claims are true or not true. We have a foundation of evidence. The records are not evidence themselves. Some archival theorists would debate that, but it provides this epistemic trust, and that epistemic trust, I argue in my book, is essential for social trust. So when we have a need to, for example, prove that you've graduated with a certain university diploma, we need to know that for social trust. We need to know that I can place trust that you are properly trained as an archivist, for example, maybe. And the foundation of that social trust is epistemic trust. And that's what blockchain promises to give us back in this age of manipulatable and malleable information, which has also contributed to this explosion of disinformation that we have. So this began to be realized about blockchain technology in about 2014 even. The Economist came out with a very famous article, The Great Chain of Being Sure About Things, and said the blockchain is even more potent technology than Bitcoin, the currency. By that time, Bitcoin had been around since about 2008. The notion of shared public ledgers may not sound revolutionary or sexy. Neither did double entry bookkeeping or joint stock companies, yet like them, the blockchain is an apparently mundane process that has the potential to transform how people and businesses cooperate. This will come as no surprise to archivists. We understand that record keeping underpins human social relations and, forms this invisible web or architecture in which society operates. So ever since then, we've seen an explosion of different applications of blockchain technology for record keeping. So we've had a couple examples, of course, today with Hervoy's project and Anne's project. So human rights violation, evidence capture, and secure storage for protecting public archives against tampering and corruption in the case of Hervoy's project and Anne's project. Land title transfer and registration was the first project that I ever looked at, one proposed for in Honduras to take land registry records and put them on a blockchain. And I wrote about that in my very first paper on this topic. Land occupancy, evidence capture, and secure storage. I'm working on a project right now involving the capture of homes, evidence of homes, lands, and property claims for individuals who have been displaced by conflict, sadly increasing all the time now. And carbon credit tracking, for example, in relation to reducing carbon emissions globally. Public procurement, I have a PhD student who's from Brazil who is looking at how blockchain might be used in public procurement processes to reduce corruption. Regulating the disposition of records as well, again, to reduce corruption, prevent the unauthorized disposal of records that might be controversial. Hervé has also looked at resealing digitally signed records in terms of long-term preservation previously. And of course, Jesse's talked about non-fungible tokens and the relationship between blockchain and works of art, and that is finding resonance with a lot of artists who find a way now to not only claim and protect their intellectual property in digital form. A lot of our artists had, when they put their digital art out there, maybe make it available on the internet, had no way to protect the intellectual property in that, and also new ways to gain economically, even if the artwork is subsequently sold on. So there's enormous potential there. I've been looking more recently at how blockchain could be used in health records management, because a lot of my work focuses on current records management. And I've got a short video that I'll play. It's not the greatest video, there's a bit of a lag on it, but it'll give you a sense of what these new records could look like.
Can benefit society. We're here at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. We're about to check out a lab that is working on blockchain technology. Dr. Victoria Lemieux runs the lab. She's looking at how blockchain technology can be used in healthcare. So this whiteboard has not been erased since 2018. So what are we looking at?
So this is the genesis of the MyPDX, the Personal Health Wallet blockchain project.
The Personal Health Wallet would be a secure enclave on your phone that stores your health information without sharing it with anyone else or even having it traceable back to you.
We're basically just showing our credentials, just like we would show our driver's license. The way that we do that is we scan that barcode, or the QR code, I should say. Now the health wallet that is running on this infrastructure remotely in you have a secure communication channel that's encrypted just between the two of you.
Victoria's app would allow you to access your health records instantly and protect your data from hackers. The wallet would be much more secure than current systems because of how difficult it is to change information stored on a blockchain.
The way I like to think of it, it's just another form of record keeping. Another word for blockchain is distributed ledger. The blockchain has something called a consensus mechanism, which is used to make sure that all those copies of the ledger, they match. And if one copy of the ledger doesn't match, you know that somehow that's manipulated. And it's all part of this sort of trend to empower people to control their data, take power away from platforms that have tended to hoover up our data without asking.
There's still lots of questions about this technology, like, can cryptocurrency ever go green? And will there be enough buy-in from people to make the uses worth it? With more people hopping on the blockchain bandwagon every day, people like Victoria and the 400 Drums team are just beginning to tap into the potential of the technology and are hoping to use it for good.
Okay, so the 400 Drums project, I'll provide a link to the entire video because that is an Indigenous NFT project, which is really, really very interesting as well. And will give you, as Jesse showed, a sense of how artworks are transforming and how artists are engaging with this technology. Now, there's huge promise. We can see much of benefit in terms of social trust, epistemic trust, but is blockchain going to live up to its hype? And so one of the things I wanted to do by way of opening up questions for everyone is just to highlight some of the issues and challenges that I've identified in the research that I've been doing on this technology and its use for record keeping. So, of course, I've claimed that blockchain can provide a foundation for epistemic trust, and that foundation is to have trustworthy records. So through an archival diplomatics lens, I've really looked at a lot of these projects, and in broadly speaking, with archival diplomatics, the claim is that trustworthy records must have accuracy, reliability, and authenticity. So if you look at some of these NFT projects, for example, not the ones that that Jesse or the 4 Drums group are speaking about and engaged in, but some of the NFT projects, there's a question about, you know, when these works are minted as NFTs, non-fungible tokens on blockchain systems, can we really trust that the person who claims to be the creator of this artwork is the creator of this artwork? So there's a truthfulness question which links to the accuracy, the broad area of accuracy. There's also questions of bitwise versus records integrity that has been flagged by the Archangel project that was done by the UK National Archives, where we know as archivists we have to make slight transformations to records in order to preserve them over the long term. But blockchain integrity is very rigid. Any kind of bitwise integrity can affect the hash that gets put on the blockchain and render the record, you know, indicate that it has no longer integrity and that it's been manipulated, which would not necessarily be true from a record-keeping authenticity sense. We would still have the message, the intellectual content of the record preserved. There's also, in many, many cases, a missing archival bond, meaning that the ledger record, or what is actually put on the blockchain, whether it is the actual transaction record or just a hash of it, doesn't bear any connection back to the act or the transaction that led to the creation of the record. And so you'd be looking at this hash, even some metadata of the record, and you would have no way of understanding what does that record actually represent? What is it actually a record of? And of course, you can't authenticate it if you don't know what it purports to be. In the case of NFTs, there's a broken link problem oftentimes where the minting, the transaction that mints the NFT or is involved in exchanging the NFT is on a blockchain, but the actual digital artwork is stored somewhere else. And there needs to be a link or connection cryptographically to those. That's often broken. And so you might have a record saying you own this artwork, but you might have no way of retrieving that artwork. So that is a problem, not just with artworks, but as records stored off chain as well. presentation of evidence outside of the blockchain system, or even sort of how do we capture these blockchain records and continue their authenticity if we have to remove them somehow from their originating record system context. Hervoy mentioned compliance with privacy regulations and GDPR. I think that continues to be an issue. One of the things I did when I was developing the health records app was make sure that not even a consent to share records, nothing about the transaction that went on between the individual and their health provider or health researcher was recorded on a blockchain, to make sure that there was no data leakage from any kind of transaction on a blockchain, and also to guard against quantum computing and the capabilities that it will bring to actually break some of the cryptography that we're using to record some of these transactions on the blockchain. We have to think ahead to protect such sensitive records as health records. Financialization of records with tokenomics. I focused in my book in Searching for Trust on what I call ledger trust, which is this epistemic foundation for trust that blockchains give us. Others have talked about quote unquote trustless trust or algorithmic trust, where the incentives of the actors that are participating in a blockchain are aligned because of the use of crypto economics. So you get paid to mine blocks and validate them and add them to the chain. You get a block reward in the Bitcoin system. And mentioned in Arweave, there was sort of payments involved. So this crypto economics or tokenomics and can align incentives, but also raises questions about the financialization of record keeping, and whether or not that is healthy for society or a good thing overall. And of course, as archivists, we have to be thinking about long-term preservation. These new records, these new digital assets will come in cryptographic form. They will have attributes and characteristics that are different. Their intellectual form will be quite different. I've talked about all of this in my book, and we'll have to come to terms with what this means in terms of long-term digital preservation. So I'll leave it at that. And hopefully these will give us some things to think about as we carry forward our conversation.
Thank you, Vicky. You have raised quite a lot of very important questions at the end. Before I open a discussion or a sort of a panel among all the speakers or between all the speakers, I'm inviting audience to pose questions using social media. We will be collecting them here, and we'll try to provide good answers to those questions that you might have, or even comments. Why not? So in terms of questions from my side, I would like to ask Anne first. Anne, you spoke about financial, economic, and political exclusions. This means that the societies that have a need for blockchain and digital proofs really a lot. They are expelled from their countries, or they're excluded financially. How can they establish a proof on blockchain beforehand? Is it possible? Is it possible to also provide or establish authenticity out of the digitized copies of the original?
Thank you, Boy. There's really sort of two parts to that. And I think the first one is that the kind of benefits of using blockchain are things that would be enormously important to these communities. But these communities are probably, as you point out, some of the least empowered to get engaged with this kind of technology because of that financialization that Vicky was referring to a few minutes ago. And it's one of the reasons why we turn to Arweave and HermaWeb as holding out at least the promise to help to start to address that. And I think if we can find a way that's successful to participate in these technologies, the other piece of that is the ability to do something to rebalance what are very unbalanced power relationships around records at the moment, because these populations are being persecuted through records and record keeping, and they're being tracked through records and record keeping, and they don't have the tools to push back. And this is a tool that helps to push, potentially could help to push back, but they're excluded financially. So, you know, if we can address that financial piece, I think it is very powerful. And we do have to factor in power relations as part of that discussion, which is not a discussion we have very often around record keeping. I mean, we should have more often with these kinds of populations. There are over 100 million now displaced people around the world. That's a heck of a lot of people who have been displaced records-wise. The second part of your question was about, actually, as I understand it, you know, how do we get things into the blockchain, and how could we do it quicker? Because could we anticipate some of these kinds of forced displacements that are likely to happen and preempt them with the collection of documentation and get them to somewhere safe? And this is something we've been looking at now for several years. You know, obviously there are spaces in the world where populations have continuously been under oppression. They know at some point that will tip to the point where they might have to move, and maybe one could develop a way to begin to upload those documents onto the blockchain. The problems that creates, we need protocols that would work. We need people to help ordinary people do this in ways that would ensure continued trust in documents that have to be transformed generally from paper to digital. And we need a way, not in general, to persuade authorities to give people access to their own documents, because this is another problem. And if they can get access, not to tip authorities off that people are about to flee. So those are social problems, not technology problems. So we have to unpack all of those things and tackle them one at a time. You know, part of this is pressure that could be brought by the world archival community onto certain countries that are not allowing people to access their own records, so bring more pressure onto them. But part of it is also a way to educate the public that their documents are actually really essential to their long-term health and well-being, not only for themselves, but future generations who may exist in diaspora. When they lose their records or can't lose access to them, they lose all the rights and status that come with that too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you, Anne. Yes, indeed. A lot of efforts should be put into that, and try to figure out how to best approach it. And also, I would like to say that we have a question from the audience, and I'm glad that we have one. So I would like to ask Victoria, a ramble forget. Ask us how much IT expertise should a records manager have to be able to apply such emerging technologies as blockchain? I think this is a sort of a tricky question to answer to, because of the, in my view, interdisciplinarity of the possible response to that. And also, you have been involved, and we both have been involved in a computational archival science. Is that a solution?
Yeah, so I think it's a bit of a sliding scale. I think the key thing is what you mentioned, Hervé, about multidisciplinarity. So when you're getting involved in these projects, it's really, really important to work as a team. And when I'm designing blockchain solutions, I'm looking at it through a 3-layer lens model that actually, you know, was evolved out of some work that we did in 2018. Hervé was involved in this, and it looks at blockchain technology in these 3 layers: a social layer, what is the social objective? So like Anne was describing, the importance of these systems for the Rohingya people. What is the ledger layer, the information layer? This is the area of archival expertise. And then there's the technical layer, which is the expertise of maybe computer scientists or engineers. And you'll get people with different expertise working around the table to bring these projects to life. That is the ideal scenario. And in that case, you're working with people with technical expertise and IT expertise, but you're bringing your archival and records management expertise into that group. That is the ideal scenario. Now, that said, does it help if you have an understanding of, how the technology works and its capabilities? Yes, of course. That way, when you're interacting with your colleagues on the technical side, for the technical layer, you have a sense of what is possible and what some of the issues are from an archival perspective and how they manifest technically and maybe what some of the technical solutions are. But I have to tell you, when my students come to my class, they're coming from traditional arts background. Many of them do not have any exposure to computers aside from, using them maybe for communications or preparing their assignments and so on. And if we gradually do some lab experiments so that they can get used to the technology, they can see how it works. And I think that there are many, many opportunities. There's a lot of open source information and courses that are available on this technology. And I would just encourage archivists who are curious about it to avail themselves of some of this open source, these courses, and get involved in exploring and experimenting with this technology to understand it better. But don't forget that your expertise is the archival expertise, and that is extremely important in the context of this technology. And that's what you bring to the table, which has just as much value as the IT expertise.
Agree. And I think actually that there is a need for archivists at least to understand how the technology works in order to be able to at least see what is, for example, missing, like archival bond you have mentioned earlier on, and so on. I also have a question for Jesse. Jesse, you have been working with NFTs. Do you think that the NFT is currently in a stage of hype? It might be viewed as a high-risk investment more than art itself. For example, we have all seen examples of people buying very pricey virtual real estates just to build a virtual house and to put an NFT on display for anyone who comes. Does this have a long-term future? Will we be able to archive that? What are your thoughts on this?
I guess I would answer that question by taking us back in time and imagining when the railroads were being built in North America. I think it's human nature. It's not the technology that's doing this. It's about speculation. And so a lot of the digital land and the kind of the NFT sales at the moment are the ones that are quite hyped, are more akin to kind of selling the railroad before you've built it. You have to have trust in the people who are building to know whether or not that's a good kind of investment, I guess. So that's up to the buyer and the investor to kind of figure out. But there are issues with authenticity. There aren't a lot of institutions doing this. OpenSea, the marketplace for NFTs, I think it's worth something like 13 billion at this point in the valuation, whereas Sotheby's might be worth something like $3 to $4 billion. So at this point, yeah, it's quite a hype thing. But I think in the political climate we're in, if it were just kind of like virtuous, kind of progressive, interesting projects trying to drive this space, I don't think it would scale. And I think that's at the same level as something like, Tesla being, an electric car company that has convinced the right wing that electric cars are for them. So you kind of have to work within the political landscape you're in, and it's giving access and resources and funding to so many artists at the same time that they didn't have otherwise, because the art market was really kind of socialism for those who gatekeep and have the most, and kind of rugged individualism for those who are newcomers or who might not be kind of white European identity as well. So it's a technology that's providing for a great kind of rearticulation, I would say.
Thank you. Yes, I also think that we can almost see a new role of archivists here. They should be, in my view, reaching out to, let's say, introducers of new virtual worlds and so on, in order for them to make them aware of the needs of long-term preservation, so to say, because we have seen some virtual worlds being available and later on being defuncted. So it's a threat to anyone who, let's say, invest in that. But we have another question from the audience, and I'm glad to see some familiar names here. Shadrach Katu, our colleague, ask a question. First, I'll ask a question I'll address this question to Anne. So Shadrach asks, says that not many individuals in the global south have the kinds of sophisticated devices like PCs, laptops, or smartphones that could be used to participate in the blockchain. So do you know of any projects that are using low-end devices like feature phones? Or otherwise, he thinks that the development will widen rather than narrow the gap.
Thank you, Shadrach. That's a really important question. I actually don't know the answer to the question, but I have a couple of comments here, because one of the things that we also know from the refugee work that we do is that South and Central American refugees and migrants who've been moving north tend not to have smartphones as well. And often the assumption is by Northern Hemisphere powers that of course they've got access to smartphones, but they don't. Not only do they not, but it can be incredibly dangerous for them to carry that kind of technology with them because of kidnapping and ransoms and all sorts of other things. And we certainly know that in the camps, the refugee camps in Bangladesh, that we've been trying to collect documents. That again, owning a smartphone would be it can be incredibly dangerous thing as well. So that's definitely a problem. I would say developing an archive on the blockchain that is permanent and long term is important, regardless of whether or not everybody can access it right now using that kind of technology, in that we're also developing something that is for the future as well as today. Obviously, you really want people to be able to access these things today, but we certainly want those things to be around for them tomorrow as well, in whatever technology world we're living in at that point. But Vicky may know the answer to Shadrach's actual questions.
Well, it's an ongoing challenge. So there are no answers right now. There is only the question, and it's important to attend to that question in everything we do to design the technologies of the future of record keeping. So, for example, in one project, I'm not working in the projects in the Global South at the moment, but in a project that I am working on with the disadvantaged individuals within the Vancouver area and in other parts of Canada and North America who are suffering from opioid addiction. We are, and this is a project with Lifeguard Health Technologies, we have developed a device that is a very simple kind of lockdown tablet, which just simply has a timer. And if you are, involved in, if you're taking opioids, for example, in a safe space, which this device would be located in, you would just simply be taking the opioids. If you do not press the button before the counter ends, it sends a signal to emergency services to come and check on you. So I think that what we need to look at is, how will the record keeping be used? How will the technology be used? By whom and in what circumstance, which your question raises, and what affordances, what technologies will they have access to? How will they be able to use those technologies? And that's the human-centered design of technology that has to be an important piece of all of these record keeping solutions that we might be addressing. So that's the best answer I can give you right now, and an example of how we are trying to attend to these issues. But we have to think, as archivists, we're going to have to preserve these records, and we're going to have to make them available to people, down the road, how many years down the road, centuries down the road. And we have to think about, well, how will we render these records for a broad range of individuals going forward? And that's, the added complexity of what we have to deal with as archivists. And it's particularly important in the context of these kinds of records, but also artworks that are going to be extremely complex digital objects, and thinking about how will we make these available for people. So thank you for that question.
Following on that, Vicky, I would like just to ask you, you have mentioned quantum computing coming just right the corner, and I have heard a lot of questions in many occasions whether the advancement in cryptographic technology will actually break the blockchain. Do you think that just adding new and much stronger cryptographic algorithmic proof as the one used in the first next block of a blockchain will be enough?
Yeah, I think it's always kind of a race, I suppose. I'm not a cryptographer, so I can only go on the basis of what I'm hearing from cryptographers, that we're really about 5 years out from quantum cryptanalysis that will break some of our, like SHA-256 hashing algorithm that we're reliant on for much of the hashes that are embedded into blockchains. So we have to think about, how, for example, this new capability will impact upon the cryptography that we're reliant on in terms of how blockchain functions. And if we're only 5 years out from technology that could break that cryptography, we have to be able to design systems that are nimble and that can swap out cryptographic algorithms for new, stronger cryptographic algorithms, and to think about not just relying on, the obscurity of the hash information and the fact that it is a one-way hash function. You can't, take a fingerprint, for example, of a document any more than you can take my fingerprint and reverse engineer me from or the document from its fingerprint. But with this new technology, you actually might be able to do that. So we have to think about, okay, in that case, how do we design systems that will prevent that sort of risk from occurring? And it's really about being nimble and being modular in how we design our systems. And maybe it speaks to the enduring value of archives, because when for centuries we've trusted the fact that records have been brought into archival institutions as a way to say, these records are authentic and they will be preserved in a way that respects their chain of preservation and protects their authenticity. And we are now, relying on a technology to give us some of that. But maybe there are limits to what the technology can provide. And maybe we still do need institutions that can offer some of that authenticity when the cryptography breaks. So these are all big questions that we're going to have to grapple with. And society at large is going to have to grapple with. What I would say is that archivists need to raise their voices more. They need to become involved in these conversations and share archival knowledge and raise these thought-provoking questions about the future, because many of the designers of blockchain technologies, as is natural, are thinking just about the now. Let's just build this, this solution, but not thinking about maybe, what will this mean for society in terms of access to these records 50, 100, 500 years from now. So we have a role to play, and we should raise our voices.
I agree, and this is, I think, the important message that could be applied to all of our three speeches today. We should really raise our voices against, displacement of people and help them out. We should also raise our voices in terms of helping artists, and maybe decentralized organizations, and NFTs is just a new and possible modality to for artists to finance themselves, to become more known, and to also engage in a new crypto community. And also we need to put the grounds of all of this into epistemic trust, as Victoria has mentioned, and get actually back the trust that we originally had in physical archives, also into the archives of a new form of relying on blockchain technology. So with this, we will be closing up this panel, this discussion. I would like to thank Anne, Jesse, and Victoria for joining us today. I think that we have opened a lot of questions, and it is a good thing to open questions, because then we will be thinking about them, and also bringing those questions to all our communities we belong to. I would like to also thank everyone who joined us in today's panel. And with this, I will close up. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Hervé. Thank you, everyone.